Hello everyone and welcome back to the Daily Roleplay. I hope you all had a safe 4th of July yesterday. Hope no one got hurt by all those firecrackers and fireworks if you celebrate the 4th of July, of course. Now, today's topic is backstory. I wanted to do backstory in a separate episode from the character creation video, which I think all of you that like it, and I understand that it was too long. I hope the 20-minute episodes are a lot better as far as time-wise for y'all. Anyway, I did backstory in a separate episode because it involves enough to be in its own episode, and I didn't want to make the character creation episode go on even longer. So, what is backstory? Backstory is the history of your character. It's what kind of defines your character up until the now, up until the point where you're playing him, or her, or it, or anything. So, I guess we could start off by saying what goes into developing a character's backstory. Things like social class, profession, family, their family's traditions, the character's upbringing in that family, any conflicts they've had, like a big tragedy in their life. Tragedy. Any love that they've had in their life, a mate or a husband or a wife, any triumphs. So, did they win a war, or did they save someone's life, or just in general loss? Maybe loss of a homeland or loss of a friend of theirs. Those could be learning experiences as much as tragedies. I'm never going to say that word right, am I? And apparently I can't say word right. This might be a long episode. So, how do all these fit in there? They're just a bunch of words so far. Well, think of it like this. A character's social class, from the moment they're born until now, wherever your character's starting from, as you're playing him or her, kind of defines part of who they are, in the fact that if they're of a very low social class, there might be social stigmas placed on them, stereotypes leveled at them, maybe even racism, or they just don't have a lot of money, so they're more used to the simple way of life. They prefer hard work and just enjoying some mead with a bunch of friends at the tavern rather than big, expensive golden halls and caviar and stuff like that. It can define both your character's tastes, part of them at least, and their viewpoint on the world. So, I have a character in mind that I'm going to do, and it is someone that I've enjoyed for quite a while, but I kind of want to revamp, kind of like I did in my character creation episode. This character is quite literally a phoenix. Mind you, an anthropomorphic phoenix. Well, she can shapeshift between her normal hued bird form and just a two-legged humanoid. This has been a very loosely defined character. I made her for a specific task, and that task has been done. But I still want to roleplay the character. I had a lot of fun with her. So, what am I going to do with her? Well, since she's kind of completed the task that I wanted her to be done with, or done for, I can start over with her. I can keep some of the things that I made, but I can change them if I want, add things to it, or completely remake it. So, what I'm going to be doing here is, I'm going to be going through each thing, and I'm not going to pull up a list or anything for this episode, because backstory, you can write down notes and stuff, but it involves more thinking than it does actual note-taking or categories and stuff like that. Even for those people that are organized and you like the lists and such things, you're going to be finding yourself to do more thinking than you are planning things out when it comes to your character's backstory. It's how history kind of unfolds for a character. Now, for this character, she's a phoenix. So, does that mean she's an old one that's just been rebirthed a few times? Or several times? Or is she an actual offspring? A relatively young phoenix? I like the idea of. I've been doing a lot more middle-aged characters. I've been doing more young characters per se, not very young like kids, but teenagers, stuff like that. I think I actually want to start this character out as an older one, an elder, I suppose you could say. So she's an older character. Well, the social class and profession tie into all that. Well, it can. You can have your character be whatever you want it to be. I will actually say that it does, because she's interacted with people. What are the races of her homeland and stuff are. So, I'll say that starting off, she was just Nora Phoenix out in the wild. They start out in the wild don't usually have a family per se. Most Phoenixes don't delve into civilization until they're older. Especially not to bring up hatchlings and stuff like that. So starting out, just a typical Phoenix learning the ways of the wilds and just growing up, learning how to be a Phoenix from her parents. However, she is of the sort that has quite a bit of curiosity. So though she started out just being out in the wilds with her parents, she very quickly, relatively speaking for Phoenixes, wanted to get to know civilization. Fortunately for her, her father was actually one that was involved in the civilization nearby. By nearby, I mean 100 miles from where the chicks were brought up, but for a flying creature, that's not too bad, especially one as large as Phoenixes are. So what happened? Well, after about a century or so, the hatchling grew up, she got older, wasn't as completely naive as some people would say, but her curiosity did get the better of her once. She actually ended up having to regenerate once. The whole dying in flames and coming back up from the ashes. She ended up biting off a little bit more than she could chew from a basilisk. You know, the ones that turn creatures to stone. Fortunately, I typically imagine phoenixes and other supernatural creatures of epic scale to kind of be either immune to it or not quite entirely phased by it. She didn't quite end up lunch meat so much as encroaching upon the basilisk's territory and couldn't quite fight it off at her younger age. But she's fine. She ended up rebirthing and she learned quite a bit of constraint then. Her parents also gave her quite the beak lashing. Yeah, here's my terrible puns again. Hope they're not too bad. Yeah. Anyway. Now, what happened when she got curious again about civilization? Well, her father took her out to civilization and he introduced her as, well, quite frankly, his daughter. He been involved in the civilization for a number of centuries and they were quite welcoming of her. She was able to take a humanoid form at that time. It wasn't her preferred station yet, her preferred form, but she quickly grew into it being her preferred form as she, more so than her other siblings, became quite attached to the humanoids around her. That she was now kind of coming to full maturity. And, well, she just got into things. So where does that bring me in terms of her backstory? She had a foundation in survival, in knowing how to grow and use her phoenix powers from her parents. She had both parents. They didn't die in an early age and die and kind of get separated from her. She quite simply she has a foundation. She knows how to survive, and she has learned to be wary and not get in over her head danger-wise. because she had a fatal experience when she was younger. But she does have a curiosity still. That's kind of her foundation, her upbringing, if you will. Now, social class. Her father had been involved for quite a while, and this is a community of humanoid felines. Tigers, lions, stuff like that. Not Some were magical, but the majority were just kind of living, surviving, and well, he's a phoenix. He kind of had a noble status. So she started off her time among humanoids, a nobleman's daughter. So she got used to the finer things in life. Developed a little bit of a snooty attitude. It kind of grew out of her as she matured through life, but she definitely likes the finer things in life, and it's also a basis for her to enjoy being in control of a situation, being able to command around others. She has a very dominant personality. Now, unfortunately, this upbringing as a nobleman's daughter, the social class, also brought with it a bit of bad influential. Typically, phoenixes are more of a neutral standpoint, or could be seen as good. However, this particular one wasn't quite entirely neutral. The city was involved in slavery and black marketry, and well, the phoenixes got into it themselves. So she grew up around having slaves, and it's kind of embedded in her. She grew on, and eventually her father didn't so much die, as a couple hundred years later she was already firmly established, became a noble woman of her own. But her father and her parents kind of moved on from that particular city. She, of course, can visit them just fine, given she's Phoenix too, but they ended up having to leave and wanted to find a different place. Not necessarily to make new family, but there's a certain wanderlust for avians that, well, kind of brings them out of their nest eventually. She, however, quite loved the place that she was at, so at about 500, she was on her own, firmly established in the ways of civilization, criminal enterprise, being a noblewoman, politics, all that. So, what does that mean for the character's backstory? Or your character's backstory, if you've been following along? The example I'm giving of this character's backstory, as I'm making it, is to help you see how the basics are kind of formed out, and how a backstory kind of grows as it continues. So, let's take a quick recap. I've gone over her basic childhood. It was a very basic idea, just learning to grow, survive in the wilderness, survive as a phoenix, grow into her race, her powers, stuff like that. And said she was very curious from the onset and kind of had a bad experience early on. That gives you reason for caution in your character's backstory, or at least this one's, to match her curiosity, stuff like that. So you can kind of see how this is the childhood for this character was just giving her reason to be able to survive on her own. Basic survival skills, basic identity as her race, and she didn't get torn away from her parents or anything and raised by a different race, so she is identifying as a phoenix. No other kind of affiliations or identity crisis. Now, as a noblewoman, the attitude kind of comes in from the social class. You can kind of see how, because her family was more of a entrenched in nobility, she kind of got the attitude that many nobles can get, especially given that the city that they were in was involved in black marketry, slavery, and such. More of that criminal mindset, not really caring about others so much as looking out for oneself first. That I am more important than you because I'm noble born kind of attitude. Used to the finer things. That kind of stuff. So all in all, the first part of a character's backstory lays the framework for their personality and their outlook on life. Just the framework, the bedrock, the foundation. Because what happens early on in a character's life defines who they are a great deal growing up. Later on, yes, tragedy can happen and it can change your outlook on life. But the innate habits and traits and quirks of a character develop early on, with some being added after middle age, stuff like that. So, back to this character. What happened to her after her parents left? Well, she quite well took over the nobility. She ran the city that had grown into a couple other cities. It was now a little bit of a nation of its own. She took over in the fact that she was firmly entrenched in the criminal enterprises of the nation, while also being born into nobility. She quite well took over an entire nation, actually. So much in the sense that she was one of the nobles in the background running things. She was the head of the criminal element. However, she was not the emperor at the time. She was just one of those that had almost as much say as the ruling family, just because she had her talons everywhere. She was used to conniving, she's cunning, she's very, very politically minded and knows how to tango with the best of them, whether it comes to criminal elements or politicians. One could say she was a bit of a slimeball, actually. However, that does not mean she was infallible. She lived like this for a long, long time. Grew up just continuing advancing herself, helping the nation grow, and getting more and more contacts around the world. However, like any story, a nation does eventually have its troubles, and slavery and black market trade can quite well get quite a few enemies for a nation. And up there was a war, and while she fought herself, she's a phoenix after all, and being involved in the criminal underworld, she could hold her own in a fight. She knew how to be a phoenix after all, and they're quite intimidating on their own. She was fully mature and could transform into her pharaoh form, and a large phoenix is quite the fight to behold. However, even though perhaps she had been trained in fighting from other criminal elements, it's a cool idea. She got some training to fight. Gladiators and stuff trained her. They ended up losing. What does this mean for the character? Well, being a phoenix, that was her second death. This is after about 1,000 years of being around. She ended up dying. 900 years of living through a country, just reaching her claws and everywhere, and then suddenly she died. It all ended in one big fell swoop. The nation didn't get crushed, but it got ground down completely. The entire nation just got wiped from the face of the planet by the time they were done, the enemies. So that was her second death. She had learned to be quite cautious in how to take care of herself during her early age, and her father taught her well. She had 400 years of tutorship in the ways of nobility and criminal enterprise from him. But that whole time, she was on top of the world for a particular section of the world, and she ended up getting too high in attitude, too full of herself. That death there and the loss of her home, her base of operations, kind of it gave her quite a lesson in the fact that things are fleeting. no matter how long they've been, eventually things do come to an end. And kind of set her back a while. That's not to say that she lost her wealth and her connections and everything. No, she had plenty of connections around the world. She had quite a few residences around the world and places to go. But she was quite set back, and she was basically punctured in the heart by this war. So what does that mean for the backstory? Well, got through the childhood, the middle years. She, well, kind of, for Phoenix, she has been firmly established to be what kind of character she is, what kind of alignment and strength and her weaknesses. Her weaknesses? Well, very noble crusaders. Her personality flaws are quite well in depth. She's a bit of a slimeball. However, she's learned a bit of subtlety now, whereas before she knew it in the criminal element and stuff, but she'd always been one to flaunt herself in public, being noble and all. She now understood that she couldn't just take everything and expect no repercussions. Eventually, your actions will catch up with you. So in the end, she ended up leaving the ruins of her civilization and ended up traveling a lot. And she started going to her contacts, and it changed her mindset about things. And she ended up deciding it was better to wander than to ever settle down in one particular place. She ended up traveling to different countries where the black market and criminal enterprise is still around. It is her world, after all. Ended up making plenty of individual bases of operations, lots of contacts, lots of places that she was involved in, kind of built up each individual one and moved on to the next. So instead of one centralized point where she put all her eggs in one basket, so to speak, she spread out. So even if someone does come after her, well, they're gonna have a hard time shutting her down. Even if one place gets destroyed and ruined, like her homeland, it's gonna be quite fine for her. During this time of wandering, this is when a character can come into their own in a way. Eventually in someone's life, even if they've just lived in the town their entire life, they're just some backcountry person and they lived there for, say they're human and they lived there 80 years, never once ventured outside the town. Eventually the world does come to them, no matter how backwater a place it is. Eventually the world will come to them. So after you've established the majority of your character building of your backstory, the parts of your backstory that really build the basis of your character, the foundation of them, you'll find yourself moving on to when they finally get to know the world as it really is, either through wandering it or the world being shattered by the outside world as it comes in and issues from the outside world pour into theirs. Now, what does this mean for my character? Well, it means that during her wandering, she learned quite a bit. Her parents had taught her much of the world, of course, but she had never quite, well, ventured on beyond her own world aside from the criminal contacts she had made. She, of course, had visited slave-holding establishments. She visited black market centers and stuff to make herself well known personally. But she never went outside the criminal world. And for the first time, she saw what the other side was like. The good side, if you will. She ended up seeing what a hard, earnest day's work was like. She knew how to survive and stuff from her young age, of course, but she hadn't done it in a while. And though she had the fighting training and stuff, which means that she hadn't gone too soft. She dominating personality. She was very stubborn. She was quite fine in the wild, but she got reminded of how hard it could be. She also got shown, well, how it is to live without much. As she traveled the world, she saw everybody else, pretty much. She ended up seeing the honest working side of things, the farmers, the people that actually grew the food that she ate, the people that, yes, she knew what it was not like to have much. She was involved in criminal enterprise, of course, thugs, thieves, slaves, even. She never quite saw just surviving, honestly. And now she was getting used to it again. Giving her flashbacks to her early years, and anyway. Basically, she got to visit other nations, stuff that weren't involved in criminal activities. And she ended up seeing noble causes. She got to actually experience the kind of things that destroyed her homeland. And why they did it. Now you might think, oh, so she turned over a new feather. No, not at all. It's a little bit. She wasn't as hardline. She wasn't as, evil, per se, as cruel and twisted as she was before. Good society and heroes kind of rubbed off on her, and she actually adventured with a couple people for a while. She became a patron for an adventure party. She actually went with them too, and it became quite a heroic legend in the places that they adventured and stuff. However, this was of a mixed assortment. There was one or two good people in the adventuring group, but a lot were thieves or very successful practitioners of the darker arts. One could say warlocks and blackguards, the anti-paladin, basically. There were some more neutral bards, and there were a couple people, believe it or not, a druid actually ventured with the group that was on the gooder side of things. She didn't prefer to kill people and stuff, but unfortunately she was also mostly out for herself too. It was more of a fallen druid than one in good graces with everyone else. She was basically slowly being corrupted by the warlocks and the evil tendencies in the group. Though she held on, she was that single shred of humanity, I suppose, that kept the group from truly being a blight on the land, and which is why, under the Phoenix's guidance, who learned a thing or two about subtlety now, was able to keep their more diabolical adventures under the belt and kind of spin a yarn of heroics for the group. That kind of stayed her wanderlust for quite a while. She adventures with them, their descendants, and their descendants' descendants. Mind you, a lot of these were quite long-lived because of their ties to devils and the forces of shadow and evil. Long life can come from that. So, about two or three generations of about 200 or 300 years each, the families kept their roots quite strongly in each of their respective areas of expertise. It was about another 1,000 years, where she just adventured and saw the world. Now, what's the whole point of all that? It might just sound like a big ramble, which I hope it isn't. She ended up basically making ties with things beside the criminal world, really kind of attaching herself to the more evil or darker sides of the forces of the universe. Demons, warlocks, shadow and evil, and things like that. And she even got a bit of learning from the druid, which wasn't the shape-shifting part, more of nature and how to, since the druid eventually became evil, bend nature to her needs, in a way. Minorly, of course, but the help was still there. More communication with animals and stuff like that. Other magical beasts. and learning how to kill that basilisk, which was still around, and she drove her adventuring party to go kill it out of spite. And she kind of, to this day, she's taking care of the hide of that basilisk and wears it as her primary clothing, armor and stuff. Quite soothing, actually. And she has its head kind of mounted for herself. Anyway, what does this mean? Especially for your kind of character, whoever you're making. The time when they see the world defines their more advanced connections with the world. My character started out with criminal connections all over the place. Underworld. Alright? Nobility, actually. Being a noble of a budding nation, kind of have to work with other nations that are involved in the darker trades and stuff, too. However, she didn't have connections to the forces of the world, really. An element, yes, in the criminal world. One could say that's a big force on its own, yes, but she didn't really develop her own place in the world out of her home. Which can be the same for a peasant, or a king's daughter, or a king himself, if he's just gotten into power. So, from the time that a character ventures into the world, you need to be concerned with who they are, and then how that affects how they connect with the world. Those connections to the world will change the character themselves, too. She became more knowledgeable in the darker side of things, and it more firmly entrenched her, this phoenix, in, all the darker sides of the world now. She wasn't as cruel and twisted as everyone, but while she did get involved in some heroics and stuff, and it rubbed off her a little bit, she wasn't trading in someone's life automatically. She could have a friend or two. She quite firmly, more certainly entrenched herself in her abilities and powers and just overall alignment in evil. That's the kind of stuff that you need to pay attention to as you're making your character and going through their backstory. How is each thing that happens to the character affecting them? Now, I said this is an elder character, so what happened? I suppose you could call a phoenix elder even more so than just as much as dragons, actually. An elder phoenix is something that's quite well old. Some would compare them to dragons, say 5,000, 6,000 elder. Some might even go longer than dragons, given that phoenixes reborn and never quite truly die. Elder phoenixes being around since the age of the forming of the world. Well, she's lived a good portion of her life around, and to be quite frank, the rest of her history is going beyond what she learned as the adventuring party and sponsoring them. And they'd say, how does that figure? Well, I've gotten most of the backstory done in the fact that the development of the characters done. The personality, why she is the way she is. That's what a backstory does. Defines a great portion of who the character is. So, what does this mean for the other thousands of years that she's been alive, or tens of thousands? Well, just keep stepping it up a notch. You can add in something obscenely tragic or something later in if you want, or anywhere, but when someone has tendencies, when someone has an established way they do things, they kind of just keep going along those roads unless something truly outrageous or something truly monumental forces them in another direction. For her, she kept going and going and going. Instead of just being tied to those demonic powers, she got to meet the devils that the Warlocks worshipped or made pact with. She went to the land of shadows and quite well became a blackguard in her own way. Oh, that's an interesting development. She became a blackguard in her own way. This is where thought can kind of just spur on a new part of your character. She became a blackguard. What does that mean for her? She's already in the criminal enterprise. She's into slavery and all that, so she can make the sacrifices and stuff easily for the shadow forces and stuff like that. She went to the land of shadow, met the creatures of that plane, and liked what she found. She's adopted their power, and the lifestyle suits her of a blackguard. So, and she already has the dominating personality and all that. So what does that mean? Quite frankly, she's a shadow phoenix. Just everything she has going to what she wants, and the powers of flame and shadow are both with her. And if anyone has a problem with it, she's the type that those heroes that destroy her homeland, she'd outright fight now. She's a paragon of evil in a way. The devils she has contacts with, and she can manifest some of those powers. She can turn herself into a devil, yes, but that's not her main source. She's powerful in that aspect just because she's been doing it so long. But shadows and flames are where she's at. Now for you. You've listened to me ramble about this character for a long, long time. I think this is more like a half-hour episode. However, let me get to the point. For this character, for your character, the one you're making, for any character with backstory, which is pretty much everyone because they've been living a while, your character's backstory involves how they grew up and what makes them who they are, like their upbringing. Okay. The start of a backstory is how they were as a child, their upbringing, the traditions of their family, if the family was still around, any tragedies that happened as a child, the formation years. Those first years, their childhood and teenage years, develop the kind of person they are. The basics of them. Any habits, any particular strengths of character, any weaknesses. The very prominent ones. Adult years define how they interact with the world. Starting out, the backstory defines their outlook on life, their perspective, and how they handle things. Adult years and on define how they interact with the world and their worldly experiences. That's when they really get into the world. What kind of connections they make in the world. Their affiliations. Not so much as the connections they make with people, or heroes, or legends, or criminals, and stuff like that, and nobles, but when I say affiliations, I mean what forces of the world they affiliate themselves with. The heroic crusader, a certain god, and they really become a champion of that god, stuff like that. After that, middle age into older years, their outlook on life is entrenched, and they keep doing what they're doing. They keep going along the path that they're going unless something obscenely titanic happens that just turns their entire life upside down, and they have to change everything that they've done. That's pretty much one of the only ways someone actually does get turned once they're that far into the world. In elder years, where that Phoenix currently is, they've lived through life. They're probably slowing down, not so much. If there's something like a dragon or something that gets more powerful as it gets older, they might not be slowing down body-wise, physically, but slowing down and how fast they approach things. You've lived through life, you have that worldly experience, you have the experience and wisdom that comes with age. And you take things in your own perspective. You may have learned through age that you need to be flexible in the way you approach things, or you may just be someone that has been doing what they've been doing for so long that even age and wisdom hasn't taught them to do any differently, and they're so firmly entrenched in what they're doing that it's extremely hard pressed to get them to nudge a single bit. From there, when it comes to backstory, your character will be just kind of taking it a bit slower, more laid back in the way that they're older. They've done a lot of the stuff they want to in the world. There's less for them to do. So what they do, they take their time to enjoy it. Maybe not out of a sense of just needing to enjoy life because their time is short, but there's not as much stuff left that interests them as when they were younger. So what they do, they're either extremely entrenched in, passionate about, or just want to take their own time, their own pace to enjoy it. So that's what backstory is all about. I apologize for the longer length of this episode. I kind of got a bit of a rambly section of my own in there. So, thank you for sitting with me on this one, and there should be a new episode coming out very soon. I'm going to put out a few of them, one or two today, including this one, and there's going to be a few coming out during the week, and Sunday, tomorrow. Anyway, thank you all again for sitting through the daily roleplay. I hope you enjoyed it, and there may be a weekly podcast coming to the daily roleplay with co-hosts. See you later. Booyah!